I'm Sujantra and with Pilgrimage of the Heart Yoga, and I'm here with my guest today, Astika.
Hi, how are you, Sujantra?
Good. Today, we're here to discuss this fascinating book by Jill Bolte Taylor called My Stroke of Insight. I was fascinated by this book because I saw the TED Talk where Jill Taylor talks about her experience of having a stroke, the left side of her brain shutting down. She's a neuroanatomist, and so she details, she's like an eyewitness to the brain shutting down and her left brain shutting down and the right brain staying conscious and functioning. Talks about very deep experiences, and I invited Astika here today so that we can reflect and get his insight on her experience from the perspective of Astika, who's meditated since 1972 and knows a lot about Buddhism. So I'd like to begin, Astika, with the actual experience she has. She has the experience of the stroke, and she talks about her entire left brain shutting down, her language center, her ability to think in a linear fashion, and this right brain, this whole different experience of life opens up. From your tradition and your training and your experience, how would you frame that? How would you talk about what she's experiencing in terms of the meditation, the journey of meditation?
Okay, yes. Well, it'll be a little bit hard for me to speak authoritatively on what she is experiencing because her experience is a medical catastrophe. And it is in that respect a physically induced experience, a result of a blood clot forming in her brain, shutting down the functions of the left brain, allowing the right brain to continue to function. That certainly does not happen in meditation. What we do in meditation is we simply stop listening to our thoughts. That will mostly mean that we stopped listening to the functioning of our left brain, because that's the discursive side which produces sounds that come to us in the form of thoughts and language. The right brain is more a visual and more an emotional center. We still have the functioning of the left brain, we still have the functioning of the right brain, but we let go of paying attention to that functioning. It continues to function. We don't stop thinking in meditation, we don't stop seeing, we don't stop having visual impressions in the mind, but what we do is we turn our conscious attention away from those things and go past them to a deeper level.
Whereas in her case, it was a physiological shutdown at the cellular level.
That's right, and she was paying close attention to what was happening to her mind because it was focused on it.
It was like a journey to the center of the earth, and she's in the middle of her brain watching all this occur.
She's getting a very dramatic and very colorful and vivid impression of what was happening inside her mind at the time, and of a sudden disassociation from logical and discursive thinking to one in which feeling and visual impression was much more vivid.
And contrary to what we often think, some people say to me about meditation, well, when you stop thinking, are you just like dumb, or you're not an intelligent human being anymore? But you see from her experience, the language center shut down, and yet this whole other vivid, incredible experience of life ensues.
Yeah, I would go back to the ancient example of Archimedes in the bathtub. He's taking a hot bath, and he's been thinking about a problem very, very deeply not for weeks or months, but for years. And in that moment of letting go of his thoughts and complete relaxation, eureka, I've found it. The solution comes not as a result of logic, but as a sudden flash of insight.
Now, who the heck was Archimedes?
Don't quiz me on that too deeply. He was a very famous Greek philosopher.
Now, I want to read from page 18 of her book. This is the paperback version. She says, in describing her experience, she says, because everything around us, the air we breathe, even the materials we use to build with, are composed of spinning and vibrating atomic particles, you and I are literally swimming in a turbulent sea of electromagnetic fields. And then this is the level of life she begins to experience existence at, is this vibrating formless, interconnected energy. Is that something that occurs in meditation?
Yes and no. One can't say for certain what experiences occur in deep meditation, because if you're not having the experience, you simply don't know. Any experience, whether it is a physical experience or a mental experience or a psychic experience, is going to come to the person and be interpreted according to the personality, according to the consciousness, and according to the general life practice and habit of that person. Not everybody having a stroke is going to have the kind of spiritual experience that Miss Taylor did.
And that's one thing one place I thought the book could have touched on is if she had talked about other people who have had the same type of stroke, if they've had the same experience or not. Or
Yeah,
if this
that would have been a good question.
Right.
I suspect there are people who will recognize a lot of their experience in hers. But the thing we have to keep in mind in the case of Miss Taylor is that she's a somewhat exceptional person.
Mm-hmm.
Her whole reason for going into science was based, according to her, on her concern and her feeling for her brother who suffered from a mental disease. As soon as she got in the field, she immediately connected with people who had suffered strokes. She was integrated with them as a family, is the way she describes it. So this is a very heartfelt person. This is not just a cold intellectual person. This is a person who has actively engaged her psyche, her own psyche, and her own compassion for other people. So when she has this experience, that's integrated into the experience with her.
One of the other fascinating things I found for myself on page 78, where she talks about the language centers shutting down, and she writes, communication with the external world was out. Language with linear processing was out, but thinking in pictures was in. Gathering glimpses of information moment by moment and then taking time to ponder the experience was in. So these two things, thinking in pictures and living in the moment. And the thinking in pictures, I'm reminded of a Buddhist tradition where they'll spend hours inwardly constructing mandalas or visual images. And so is that another way to get to that state of awareness? She gets there through the stroke into this realm of the visual mind. But is the Buddhist practice the same way to get to that place or to access that part of the brain?
Oh, it's a good question. Of course, there are many, many Buddhist practices from different traditions, and there is even some discussion and perhaps even some argument in Buddhism about which practices are most effective. But the basic formula is that, first of all, one has to quiet one's mind. Doing some kind of visual art certainly helps to slow down or quiet the discursive thinking. Language is a pretty recent development. Only very recently has the human brain learned to express itself in language. Before that, pictorial expressions were probably much more prevalent. So to stop speaking, to enter into a visual meditative experience, which is what the creation of mandalas is one way to enter into a deeper silence. So in that respect, I think she's just going to a more primal and more fundamental state of her own consciousness.
Which it seems a lot of what the meditation experience is about is that we've become so lost in our day-to-day thoughts and in the transitory things of life that we're getting back into our breathing, into our more primal, deeper self that's interconnected.
That's right. That's right. And you know, people are always talking about the brain, the brain, the brain. What about the heart? The heart is also a center of consciousness and a center of being, and the heart came first. The brain developed later in the history of animal evolution. Ms. Taylor's experience, she divides it into a right and a left brain experience. Okay, so she sort of bifurcates it in terms of the brain because that's her field of expertise. But I would bifurcate her experience into a mental experience versus a psychic or heartfelt experience. Because, and you will notice if you go to the TED Talk, that in her talk, she discusses the experience in a mental way of her stroke, the things she saw, how cool it was is one of the ways she describes it. It wasn't until she was laying on the gurney in the ambulance, realizing that her life was in danger, that her consciousness went down to a deeper level and it actually became a psychic experience. At that point, it's very emotional for her. She feels the surrender of her life force, and it is in that surrender, or at the end of it, that she actually says she experiences something that is nirvana-like.
And she uses the word nirvana.
That's right, she does.
And that brings me to my next quote. She talks about her senses shutting down, which is something that is key in meditation practice. You still your eyes, you're focusing on your breath, you're shutting down the kind of moment by moment analysis of the senses.
That's right.
And then she says, no longer capable of perceiving temperature, vibration, pain, or proprioception, which is the position of your limbs in space. Her awareness of the physical boundaries shift. The essence of your energy expands as it blends with the energy around you, and you sense that you are as big as the universe. Those little voices inside your head, reminding you of who you are, where you live, become silent. And so this quieting of the mind and this experience of this interconnectedness. She talks about nirvana. So is she going into the same state as the Buddha? When the Buddha talks about going into nirvana? Of course you can't know, but just is it conceivable that that experience is that close to each of us? It's just if we can redistribute our awareness that nirvana is right here.
Yes, right. Well, there is a discussion even within Buddhism, and has been for more than 1,000 years, as to what exactly nirvana is. In our culture, we have a word, love. And love has taken on a lot of different meanings. You know, you have love for your mother, you have love for God, you have love for hot dogs, okay? Lots of different meanings, all covered by the same word, love. It may come as a surprise to people that the Buddha himself apparently never attempted to define the word nirvana, although he used it many times. Therefore, after the Buddha is gone, many, many generations of monks and nuns and disciples in Buddhism have tried to define it. But you see, at that point, you have definition occurring on a lesser level of consciousness, probably. Some Buddhist groups have defined it as an endless, constant state of euphoria in which your being lives after death, very much like a Christian heaven. Others say you don't have to be dead, you can live in it all the time. That would certainly apply to something like what she has done.
And your 42 years of meditation experience, where do you sit on that one?
Well, I believe that nirvana myself, I take it to be something a bit more absolute than any kind of perception of feeling. Within the 4 jhanas of Buddhism, there is a point in one's samadhi where one goes beyond perception and is neither experiencing perception nor non-perception. Well, what is that? Nirvana, technically, is a state that exists without characteristics. It is neither joyful nor unjoyful, neither good nor bad. It is simply the basic fact of reality stripped of all these characteristics that we judge reality by.
All the dualities, all of the transitory nature.
All dualities. And therefore, it's incomprehensible to the mind, far beyond capacity of speech to describe.
But she has this experience and comes back to express it.
And her experience, no doubt, is real.
Yeah.
And to that experience, she has attached the word nirvana. As some people, even very learned Buddhists, have attached it to that experience.
But her experience transcends words, as do all the deep.
It certainly does, although she's quite eloquent in describing at least certain parts of it. No one can say exactly what experience she had, how to properly term it, or whether her experience endures. Now see, the idea behind nirvana is that it does not have any beginning or end. So once you attain to nirvana, it may be possible to experience it, get a little taste of it, and then come back from that and no longer have the capacity to enter into that state.
Like dipping your foot in a swimming pool?
Standing at the Grand Canyon for that moment and you're full of awe, and then a day later you're not there and you're not. It may be possible to get a taste of nirvana, But you see, nirvana is like the sun. We can see the sun from 93 million miles away, but we don't necessarily inside the sun. So nirvana, technically, in a strict Buddhist sense, is a state that you continue to live in. You can't actually go to another state except as a kind of decision to live a fantasy for a moment and be individualized again.
And in the book, she talks about that as she starts to recover, which is fascinating. The book is great, all about strokes and recovery and helping people in strokes. She talks about the conscious decision of realizing she's rebuilding the left part of her brain, and she's wondering or worried about what she'll lose in coming back. And there's a nice passage on page 169 where she writes, and this is she's come back to give lectures and travels. There's Oprah interviews, etc. And she says that now, to be in that space, she says, the first thing I do to experience my inner peace is to remember that I am part of a greater structure, an eternal flow of energy and molecules from which I cannot be separated. So it seems to me that she put her foot in the pool of nirvana, or dove completely into it, I don't know. But that in remembering her experience, that memory device helps her to get back into that feeling.
It sounds like she's not far away
Yeah.
from it if she's not, as you say, standing ankle deep in it all the time. One of the things in reading a little bit of the book and watching her videos that I would say is that she, as well as any non-religious trained person I've ever known, is following the path of the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva. This is a tradition of the Mahayanist Buddhists that even though one has the capacity to enter into nirvana and to choose to stay there, never come back to the vexations of this world, that out of compassion for the world, you choose to come back. And in the case of her fighting back from such a severe stroke, she would have to be highly motivated, I think, to live for somebody else besides herself.
Right, she talks a lot about that.
Because she was 95% already there in that state of release from life. So I would say this is a true bodhisattva, whether she has any formal Buddhist training or not, and that she was, to a high degree, before she had this stroke, living for the sake of others, and that she now apparently continues to live for the sake of others, also to a very high degree. So in the bodhisattva tradition, certain bodhisattvas like Kuan Yin, Avalokiteshvara, or Kannon in the Japanese are embodiments of compassion, and they forego their own enlightenment and final nirvana for the sake of liberating other beings. She certainly is following that path, I think.
Astika, I want to thank you very much for your insights.
Well, thanks for having me. It's a good discussion.
Yeah, it's a good discussion. It's nice to talk to someone who's had 40 since 1972 experiences. One of the things she mentions in her book is the work of these two people, Andrew Newberg and his associate, and a book they've written called Why God Won't Go Away. And I think we'll take a look at this book in our next interview, talk about it a little bit. And I guess my last question to you, Astika, is you read about her experience, these experiences. You practice meditation since 1972. Do you feel you're making progress towards where she's been, or do you feel you've tasted where she's been, or did she get a special blessing in life, or how does this work?
Well, I think everybody makes progress in a very unique way. I have had a few pyrotechnic experiences, in the course of my meditation, but I believe the basic fundamental teaching in Buddhism is that we don't cling to experiences. We keep going beyond them. Some philosophies believe that we have clots or knots in our being, blockages, and that when these blockages release themselves, energies are released and they manifest as experiences. But we're not to cling to the experience. We're to appreciate it, enjoy it if it's enjoyable, let go of it, and then continue deeper.
Well, it's been nice journeying with you today, Astika.
Thank you very much. I always appreciate your having me.
And this is Sujantra with Pilgrimage of the Heart Yoga. Thank you for joining us.